Okay, hello everyone, and welcome to the second installment of M Talks. This is from doctors to doctors and doctor trainees and anyone else who is interested. This is discussions around really practical issues that you can't learn from textbooks or on the wards. Now, for those of us who have been through it in medicine, there is one job I think many, maybe not all, will agree that can never truly be mastered in terms of sheer physical exhaustion, workflow interruption, sleepless nights, anxiety and fear, financial costs, and an all too frequent sense that you will never be up to the job. There is no specialty of medicine that can compete with parenting. My name is Frank Borsch, and joining me for today's M Talks are three very busy clinicians, writer, bloggers, and moms. And I'll ask each of them to wave as I call them out. So from Brighton, Ontario, that's a little over halfway between Toronto and Kingston, is family doctor, advocacy chair for Canadian Women in Medicine, regular contributor to CBC and the Toronto Star, and self-described world's okayest mom of three, Dr. Michelle Cohen. From Montreal, Quebec, freshly minted obstetrician gynecologist with subspecialty fellowship in reproductive endocrinology and infertility, blogger and mother of three, Dr. Ginevra Mills. And from Alexandria, Ontario, it's about an hour east of Ottawa, emergency room physician, hospitalist, vaccinator, blogger, and prolific author of many books, most notably the Hope Z. Did I pronounce that right, Melissa?
Yeah, close enough.
Hope Medical Mystery Series under the author name Melissa Yee. And she is the mother of two, Dr. Melissa Ewan Innes. Okay, so everybody is here. And so the way that this is going to be a very casual conversation, and I'm sure we all have war stories about parenting. But before we can actually talk about raising children, I think the first thing that we have to acknowledge is that we have to have children. And so I wanted to sort of go around and talk about the experience of pregnancy and childbirth, which for everybody was, I think, at least started during training. And Ginevra, I'm going to put you on the spot first, because if I'm not mistaken, you had your first, or you were pregnant as your first, still a medical student. So what can you tell us about the experience of pregnancy and childbirth and training?
Well, I will start by, I guess, kind of correcting you. I actually started medical school when my first child was 13 weeks old. So I was 37 weeks pregnant when I got accepted to medical school. And I think my first biggest obstacle with having children and being pregnant and everything in medical school was my experience with having to pump milk, where to pump milk, how to fit it into my classes, how to even ask people about where I could do this. And my university or my medical school was equally as confused as I was, because I think I was probably like the first person who'd ever brought it up. They were really accommodating, which was great. But so I think that was my first big obstacle to work on, and it required a lot of advocacy on my part. And then I had my second child while I was still in medical school. And I think the medical school wasn't the hardest part, I think, of having kids. I think I found being pregnant and giving birth and making all of those adjustments in residency when I had my third child was actually more difficult than in medical school. I think maybe because there's no service component to medical school. Medical school is just all about you. And so and you're learning. And so you're able to move things around. And so when we thought I was going to be too pregnant to do certain things in my clinical aspects during medical school, it was really easy to say, well, let's double up on some of your clinical activities earlier on, or let's shuffle these around and put them where they work. Whereas in residency, it was kind of like either you go off on your mat leave early, or you take a sick leave, which further extends your training, or you just push through.
Michelle, you're nodding. I don't know if you want to go around next.
Yeah, well, so I had my first at the very end of residency, or she was born, about a month before residency ended. So, I had most of my second year of family medicine residency, I was pregnant. So I agree that it's a lot. I can't compare it to an experience of being pregnant in med school, but I agree it's a lot. and thinking about like service requirements and things that you have to do, and when you're supposed to, when you should cut things off when you feel, like you said, too pregnant, or like things are just too physically demanding. So you try to plan things where you put your, easier electives towards the end of the rotate or end of your pregnancy, and kind of get as much done out of the way. I was trying to get all my call done out of the way. I really didn't want to have to deal with a lot of call towards the end or when I came back. So I was able to kind of shift things around. And the pumping milk issue is a big, big issue. It's something that Canadian Women in Medicine have been trying to work on a little bit, to get medical schools and hospitals to establish parameters around when people are allowed to go without affecting their career. So without affecting their training or their career. So no academic penalties for taking 20 minutes to go pump milk, and no, career penalties or other issues there. And just having space is a big problem. Having a clean, quiet, private space with access to a sink is really all you need, but it's amazingly difficult to get that in a hospital or in an institution, in a university. So I was pretty fortunate. I only had to do it really for a few months, for the month I came back, and then I did a few months fellowship afterwards. And I was both times I was in a hospital that had OB departments and had NICU areas. So they always have parent areas when there's a NICU where people can go pump. So, and the nurses are lovely. And so they would basically just say, if there's no one using the room, am I allowed to use it? And they would allow me to go and pump. And I was lucky that I only had to do that once or maybe twice in a given day. So a lot of folks who go back right after they've had a baby, they might need to pump every 3 hours, and a long call day, like, that might be a lot of time, a lot of time that you're scrambling to find a place to go. So I really hear that. I really feel that that's a big, big problem. And especially in a profession where really, and if you think healthcare more broadly, we're mostly women in healthcare, and younger, the younger half of the profession, where we're more likely to be the ones having babies and needing to pump breast milk, also dominated by women. So why is it so hard in a hospital full of women, usually of reproductive age, to find a place to pump milk? So I'll get off my soapbox a little bit, but that's a big issue for me.
I'm trying to avoid getting on the soapbox with you, so I'm just gonna.
Well, that's okay. I've also I told everyone that as the only male in this panel, I'm all the dad bashing can just come my way. That's okay. So, Melissa, what was your experience like?
Hey, and as far as I'm concerned, you can stay on your soapbox. That's cool. We need more soapboxes. I did not get pregnant during training. That was a deliberate decision. Like, I remember doing NICU, and the resident who was on with me was like, "Oh, my 2-year-old likes to come over," and she's like, "Let's study together." All done, and then or she'd be falling asleep, and her kid would come and pry open her eyes and be like, "Mommy, play with me, mommy." And I was like, hell no. So I just had to be done. I was like, I'm going to do all my medical training, and then I'm going to do all my, and then I can do my reproduction stuff. And, one of my colleagues was like, yeah, just in time to have no maternity leave. And I was just like, that's just life. I'm going to deal with it. But of course, fertility goes down as, with these choices. So you're always balancing one versus the other. And I was staff when I was breastfeeding, and I still had trouble. Like, I had written an article about how the only place was we did have a doctor's room, but the mail room was the same room. So I used to try and I'd go into the mail room, take all my stuff, and then go into where we're supposed to sleep, and then there's a bathroom, and I would have the chair against the door, so that people tried to come in, they couldn't come in while I was just pumping. And I was a huge pumper, so it wouldn't take very long, but it was just this huge stressful experience because they were trying to come in to use the bathroom. So we all have war stories like that, but I think it would have been worse for me when I was in med school and residency, so that's why I chose not to do it.
So following that, and again, we'll go back around, is let's say, a new medical student or resident that has some control over that, because of course, sometimes you really don't know when you're going to have a baby or want to have a baby, or, accidents do happen. But let's say things can be planned. If you could tell, or your younger self, sort of one or two tidbits about what to expect when you're expecting that's unique in training, other than, make sure to map out where to pump your breast milk ahead of time. Because there are, and joking aside, I remember when I was a medical student, there was on my peds rotation, there was a pediatric senior resident that literally her water broke on rounds, and you're kind of like, okay, I think you're okay to kind of leave us here, but yeah, just kind of share what are the pearls that you could say to your younger selves.
I'll start, I guess. I think that I have a little bit of a biased opinion because of the nature of my fellowship, and I see a lot of women who are in their mid to late 30s or older who have deliberately put off having children to put their careers first, and their biggest regret is always, I wish I hadn't have waited. And I mean, there's a lot of women who don't struggle to get pregnant at that point, but you can't deny that that's a problem. And it was very personal for me because my mom had premature ovarian insufficiency, and I knew that. And so I knew for me that there was a really good chance that my biological clock was running faster than others. So it was a no-brainer for me, unlike Melissa, when she said, she felt like it was a no-brainer in the other way. I think that so in that sense, I wouldn't change my decision. I wouldn't go back to my younger self and say, don't do it, hold off. But I would say that I think you need to really be prepared to, and it's very specialty specific, I think. Like I was lucky to be in some ways I was lucky to be in obstetrics and gynecology, other ways not. But I think you need to really get a feel for, find out who else ahead of you, older in your residency, people who are now staff in your program or department who did residency or training at the same place or even other places, and really find out what worked, what didn't work, who was supportive and who wasn't supportive. Because what I found out after the fact, especially with my pregnancy and residency, was after all was said and done, after I, was pregnant, worked until I literally went into labor and had my baby and took my time off, was that the people who I thought were in my corner to support me weren't actually in my corner to support me. And it really burned afterwards. And so I actually spent my entire maternity leave. I took 5-month maternity leave with my third. And I spent that whole time dreading going back to work because I just couldn't believe some of the things that came out of some of people's mouths, including people who I thought were there to advocate for me. So I think you really need to do your research. And obviously, if you have an accidental pregnancy, you can't really do that, but you're pregnant really early on, and you really need to find out, okay, is my program the type of program where I have to use my research time near the end of my pregnancy? Because if I accidentally go into labor early, then I'm going to get dinged for that. So I think that you really need to do your research either before you make the decision or really early on in terms of who your supports are, where you can get support. And if you can't get that support, where else in your career or where else in the training can you do it? Like, do you have a wellness office? Do you have a residency advocate or ombudsperson that can help you with those things early on?
Michelle, anything you're going to add?
So I think I would tell myself to be a bit kinder to myself about the sleep deprivation and the effects. It seems so trivial right now in retrospect. But yeah, I really thought, what is wrong with me? I don't understand why I can't do this. I've done, 4 years of med school and a year of residency already, or by the time she was born 2 years, I basically almost finished my residency. Like I've been so sleep deprived. Whatever, you roll over and you nurse a baby and maybe you change a diaper. How can that compare to being woken up for like a medical issue or being awake all night? And I did not I did not realize how there really is a difference when it's
apples and oranges.
It really is. And also just the being completely exhausted post call and not being able to deal with like the toddler crawling all over me, wanting attention. I was a little too hard on myself for not, I don't know, performing to some sort of whatever standard I had in my head or what we expect of ourselves, maybe just being overachievers. So I was like, come on, why is it so hard? Why can't you cope? You got a few hours last night. What's the big deal? So I think I'd be a little bit kinder in retrospect, that sleep deprivation is really hard. It's really tough, and it's not at all like being on call or because you get a post-call break. And then two, I think, I don't know if I would really change anything, but my first I had in residency, my second shortly at like about my first couple of years of work where I was still just locuming and not really committed anywhere to a practice. And then my third when I had my family practice. And so I don't know that I would really change anything in retrospect, but I found mat leave with my third when I actually had a practice to be the most difficult one, because residency, you have EI, you're going back, place is waiting for you, so there's some concerns about, okay, I'm going to be really fuzzy, I still have exams to write, that kind of thing. Locuming was definitely the easiest because I had no commitments, nothing to look, nothing stressing me out, nothing. I was, took whatever time I needed. I went back at my own pace, and that was great. But then having the commitment of a practice, having to still deal with having to find my own locum, having to pay my locum, having to deal with all the financial stuff, still having to do all the administrative and office management stuff. So having to deal with a newborn, having to deal with stupid, office management stuff that I wasn't going to leave to my locum, like that was really, really difficult. So I don't know that I would change anything in retrospect, but I think definitely like the planning is a big part of it, as Jennifer was saying, like the planning and knowing if you're able, because of course accidents happen, but if you're able, planning around what your career, what stage of your career you're going to be at, and just knowing that the commitments are one of the hardest challenges when you're on mat leave is having a commitment to something. So that's kind of my feedback on that.
Okay, and that's a great way to pivot. Melissa, you're going to get the floor here. Having a child once you are out in practice, sort of the planning that you did, what you wish you had known, and I don't mean the things that we wish, we all wish we knew, as how exhausting it would be and such, but the logistics, how your planning changed, how your life changed, and having a baby as a full consultant physician.
Yeah, I did want to answer the previous question, which was just I would tell myself it's all going to be okay. Like we had a lot of stress trying to get our two babies, so that I would reassure myself. And to touch on that it's really great to have a good team, which you can't always control, but if your group is baby friendly or not. Like I could tell when I was rotating as a medical student or resident, like for example, sorry, OB-GYN was not that baby friendly, but peds was, they love children. So that was, I was like, oh, these really are the people who love children, which was awesome. So the advantage of being a full-time staff and in Emerge is that financially you're better off. Well, I don't know. I never did it when I was in training, but that's what I heard. You might have savings. You might have been able to put that aside so that you can fund your own maternity leave. And which I kind of did. Like my husband works, so I have that advantage. He also took paternity leave. He gets EI. He actually has a job, and not just I don't know. We're not self-employed like us. So then it was easier, I guess. Then as part of the planning thing, if you are planning to have a child, when you pick where you're going to work, you might want to factor that into consideration. Because, for example, one of my Emerge groups was like, oh, I don't know why women take off more than 14 weeks. That's what the OMA gives you, and that's what you should take. Which I did not listen to, having worked so hard for my children. And then what else was I going to say about it? And then, for example, someone else approached me and said, there are family health organizations starting up. And if you're working in Emerge, you don't need to do the evening clinic for them because you're doing Emerge. We're two men and we need one woman. So do you want to be our one woman? And I said, I could just see all the pelvic exams dancing their way towards me. Oh, and they also, well, I guess I won't say that part. Anyway, so I was just like, no, thank you. I want to have children. And so children were a good exit from that because I knew that I didn't want the commitment, that I would feel very stressed out. Trying to get a locum, feeling responsible for people, especially in an underserviced area where there aren't other doctors to cover, it would just be hell. So it was just easier for me not to start practice at that point and keep it open as a possibility later.
So this is something, Michelle, you'll probably be best positioned to answer it. We are in a situation where I think it's now well over half of new entrants into the profession are women. Or even, men like myself, that when I was getting into practice, I was sort of very enthusiastic about being an involved parent. So what is the future looking like for accommodation? Is it, I would hope it's less of those, how many weeks do you need off to have a child,
Yeah. So, I mean, I think like if you look at women who are getting into the profession now, it's like 2/3 women. So, once we get another 15, 20 years in, we are going to dominate the profession, and then especially in the younger groups. So I think it's an issue where having lots of people doesn't necessarily change the culture. Like the culture is a really misogynistic culture. It is not women friendly. It's not family friendly. It's not supportive of that stage of anyone's life. Medicine is not generally supportive of fathers either, right? So it's just not a family friendly kind of place. And the issue gets pushed a bit more when women are in practice, because we're the women in medicine, because we're generally, we're the ones getting pregnant, we're the ones having to deal with breastfeeding issues. It's just more, it's not something that you can just ignore, whereas it's easier if you're not the birthing partner and you're in a more traditional kind of heterosexual marriage to just, you can fall more easily, follow into that culture where you're just, the wife is doing everything and you're kind of just at work. Although I do definitely speak to younger men in practice, in their early practice, or male trainees who do want to be involved fathers. They don't want to be like the absentee doctor dad stereotype of the past. But I think culture changes. It takes a lot. I often say, when it comes to like discussing women in leadership, in medical leadership, a lot of women in a lower power position does not really change things. So women right now in medicine, yes, we're increasing in numbers, but we're still mostly in the younger and lower powered groups. And for a culture that's very rigid and very traditional based and very hierarchical, that's a lot. That's a big challenge to push back on. So I don't think it's just sheer numbers. I think that's part of it, because it's just easier when you have people around you, and it's just easier when there are just more pregnant people around. It makes the problem, not invisible. But I think it's going to take some real actual pushing and arguing and activism, and real change. So having lots of women helps, but yeah, we need those women to be loud.
Good. Okay, so we've had the babies. And maybe even we've gotten away from mat leave and the negotiations around that. I guess the next thing that I think is obviously really important is childcare. There are, all kinds of options, although I guess depending on where you live, they can be easier to access than others. So if you don't mind, if each of you sort of don't mind sharing how you decided what to do with childcare, whether it was, we're going to trade off and one parent will be at home, or we'll have a nanny, or, sort of somebody's private home daycare, or one of the bigger public ones. Melissa, I guess we'll start with you and we'll go back around the other way.
Okay, cool. So I had decided to work part-time. My husband could have done it, but he just doesn't like kids as much as I do. And seriously, like he's an engineer. He's not so much of a people person. And obviously we still needed other childcare. And so we live in a rural area, and that is such a huge problem. Like you would either have to bring in a nanny, or you have to use the daycares that are there. And a lot of them are home daycares. So that's what we did for the most part. We did do a little bit of like in-school daycare and that sort of thing too. And it was kind of hellish, because I don't know if people know this, if they're not already parents, but like home daycares just come up and they go. Be like, oh, or someone gets sick or whatever, like just they're closed. So it's not easy. And so in our case, part of what held it together was just because my husband has an office job. If necessary, he could fill in. So we were just talking the other day about how like when my daughter had an accident, and then now at schools they don't do anything, they just call the parent to come get them. Well, I'm in Emerge and he's in Montreal, which is like an hour away. He's like, okay, just wait. So like, he drives in to get them. And by the way, they would always call me first and I just wouldn't answer, like because they always want to go for the mom. I find in general that physicians, like one child they might be able to manage without, but once they have two or up, they usually end up getting a nanny, is what I see. And then once they get older and they have like school and school daycare, thank goodness, so much easier.
Ginevra, you're in, actually the two of you, Ginevra and Michelle, you're in that anarchy position of having, you're outnumbered by the kids. So how did you guys go about it?
I was laughing at Melissa's comment about how they always seem to want to call the mom. And I just have a really funny quick story to say. This happened like last week. My husband, because he stays home, and I'll get to that, he is listed as the first primary parental contact at our school. And my daughter takes the bus home, and my husband was waiting at the bus stop for her, and the bus wasn't coming. And I was at work and I was seeing patients, and my phone kept ringing. And I was in with a patient who was, unfortunately, I was just told told her she had a miscarriage. So this wasn't a conversation where I could be like, hold on, I got to answer this call. And so I let it go to voicemail, and this number kept calling me, and I'm like, who is calling me? I don't recognize this number. It's not somebody important. And I find out an hour later that the school was trying to call me to tell me that there was a problem with the bus and somebody had to come to the school to pick up our daughter. And my husband is standing at the bus stop waiting, and he's the primary contact for the school. So anyway, my daughter sat at the school for an hour waiting for somebody to come pick her up, because the school kept insisting that they had to call my number when I was listed as second, but I was the mom. Anyway, my husband currently, my husband currently stays home. He works from home. He worked from home before COVID, but that wasn't always the case. So the only reason that I think I survived the end of my residency was because childcare was just not a thing I had to think about. Like, my husband got my kids ready in the morning. He picked them up from school. He was home. He made dinner. We laugh now that I was basically like his fourth child while I was writing my Royal College exam, because I just came home and I ate and I hid. Before he started his remote work at home, we had a nanny, which was very expensive for us. It took up way more money than we could afford to spend on childcare. But as someone who did, 1 in 4 call overnight in the hospital, and my husband he was a veterinarian, so he had a professional job where he often worked until late in the evenings. We just couldn't not have reliable childcare, so we had a live-in nanny, and we just it dug our debt hole immensely. And I feel like we had no other options. Like, I don't know I honestly can't even think of what we would have done. When I was in medical school before we moved, so I did my residency in Alberta. Before we moved there, I did my medical school in Saskatchewan, and we found this really nice lady who ran a home daycare, and she did things that I'm sure most home daycares don't do anymore, especially around when our kids were unwell. So there'd be times where we would show up to pick up our kids, and they'd be like, oh, your son, he was vomiting today. So we sat him apart from the rest of the kids. But I was like, oh, thank goodness you didn't call me to come and pick up my child who's vomiting. And the number of times we would have fevers or whatever. And she just, she was very motherly. So she just took care of this. And I think she just had this understanding that she knew who we were and why it was important that we had somebody reliable to take care of our kids. And so I know that was rare and maybe not appropriate if I was to think about being the parents of the other children who were at that daycare. But looking back, I'm like so grateful that I had that. And all of those situations were, aside from the nanny, but those situations are very atypical. I think there's some people who have husbands who are either stay-at-home, or partners, I should say, who are stay-at-home parents. But again, like Michelle was saying, in the traditional sort of heterosexual marriage, it's often not the dad who's the stay-at-home parent.
Michelle, how did you guys get by?
So first, I just want to totally confirm the school calls the mom first. I had, I don't even know, 3 months ago, a tense conversation with them where I'm like, stop calling me first. You have my husband's number. Don't call my office. I had one of the admin people running around looking for me because she thought it was like an emergency. The school was like, we're trying to get in touch with her for something really minor. So very annoying. You really have to don't call me first. I'm at work. So for us, with my first two, when I was still in residency, and then just shortly when I was just locuming and stuff, my husband was working a regular salary job. So he took long parental leave, and this wasn't we were kind of already thinking about. We were in Toronto. He was working on Bay Street. He did not like that. He wanted to have a complete change, and we were planning to move to the country, and he wanted to do farming. So he wasn't taking that job particularly very seriously, but he was holding on to it. He was staying with it. for the time being, and we were saving money and stuff, and I was finishing my training in Toronto. So he took long parental leaves. Like he took the maximum 1 year each time. And his coworkers were like, what are you doing? This is going to kill your career. And then the second time, oh yeah, I'm going to go on mat leave. I'm going to go on parental leave again. I'm going to be gone for a year. They were like, what? All these dads in his workplace were like, what are you doing to you?
Are you a man or what?
Are you a man? Like, do you want to work? Do you want a career? And he was like, well, this career is not something I'm looking to advance in anyway. So that was kind of how we did that, was that he took those long parental leaves. And then once we moved here, when my second was still just a baby, and then we had my third a few years later, we've just been doing part-time basically. So he's now so we're two self-employed people. Up until just last week, I was working part-time, and now I've transitioned to full-time. So we were just doing the juggle. We were just juggling. What we end up doing was we're kind of each given day, one of us is like the worker and one is the domestic. That's how it went in the past. So we kind of, okay, you're the domestic today, so you're doing like the school stuff, or you're doing, the diaper stuff, or you're doing the groceries, you're doing dinner, and I'm going to go to work and do my thing. And then when I'm home, like he's out in the fields, he's doing his stuff, and I'm the domestic and I'm doing all the. So that's been for, gosh, what's it been, like 5 years or so? That's been our strategy, is to kind of do that juggle. And now the juggle's a little bit different now, because I've switched to full time. We are in a zero childcare situation here with the pandemic. There is a local, like Melissa's totally right about, in a rural area, daycare is hard and hard to get, and a lot of it is home daycare, and a lot of it just kind of comes and goes in someone's backyard, and 1 year they're doing it and 1 year they're not running it, and you either know someone or you don't, kind of, to get into those situations. So, but there is one registered daycare that's in town that's connected to one of the local schools. So we did have our kids in there for part of the time when they were like pre-kindergarten. So that was like a little bit of a relief, because then there could be, a little bit of time when we could both kind of do our own thing, and one person wasn't just full time with like a toddler or something. But so that was like from ages 2 to 4, because they didn't have infant care. So we still had to do the juggle for infant care, but then from 2 onwards, we had some childcare, with like part-time childcare. So bit of a juggle, but yeah, no nannies, no in-home stuff. We had some babysitters on and off, but for the most part, it's just been the part-time juggle. It's how we've managed it.
Wow. Melissa, how did you guys do it?
Oh, I just wanted to point out that all 3 of us have strong partners who really stepped up. It's a completely different situation. Some of our colleagues are single parents, and some of them can be in toxic or even abusive relationships, which is a whole different ballgame. So we should acknowledge our privilege, basically.
Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, it was.
I wanted to add one other thing, which is that if you have a really good daycare or carer, you should just hang on to them, because we did have a few excellent ones and we loved them. Like, then they are like part of your family. They make your life so much easier. Your kid genuinely loves them. Like, it's wonderful. So we can't underestimate the importance of excellent childcare.
Okay, so the next question, I guess, you get the call either in the middle of the night, or somebody isn't feeling well and crawls into your bed, mommy or daddy, I'm really not feeling well, or you wake up to the sound of barfing of something. How have you guys managed to do it? Because of course, this is something where, with the role that I played in the house, normally it meant I was calling in and canceling my day, and that meant 3 weeks of playing catch up. Again, going around. Ginevra, how have you, sort of dealt with that? And granted, you were in your fellowship training, but
So I think for most of my residency all of my residency and pretty much all of my fellowship, I either had our nanny or my husband. And so it was never a really big issue. It mostly became an issue of just where the mom guilt crept in. It's like, I'm really sorry you're throwing up at 3 o'clock in the morning, but I have to be up in 2 hours and I have to operate for 11 hours. So I can't support you as your mother. And that makes you feel really bad. And so, you sort of have to balance that. I also, my little secret is that I'm severely emetophobic. And so my husband and I have this very strict no argument agreement that he deals with all vomiting in our house, regardless of who, when, or where. And I deal with everything else. And so unfortunately, that means I usually get more of the like fevers and coughs, and I can't sleep. I'm having nightmares. So I don't know, I guess, but that's just what I've decided as a trade-off. But I think it just turns out more in a sense that it just takes away from your sleep bank. It takes away from your mommy guilt, feeling good about yourself, parent ideals, when you feel like you can't actually be there to completely support your child. I haven't really gotten into a situation where I've had to cancel my day or call in sick to work. Is that even a thing? Are we allowed to call in sick to work? I've never actually done that because of my kids being sick. I don't even think I've actually ever called in sick because I'm sick, but
Yeah, that might be changing. You would hope with
with COVID.
the stakes got a lot higher in the last 18 months. So Michelle, how did you end up coping with the,
Well,
mommy?
yeah, I don't think I ever called in sick for that reason either. I'm just thinking back. I think the only times I've called in sick was during COVID time when I had an actual cold. So I was not going to go to work with respiratory symptoms, and when I was actively vomiting. So it's like I can't go to work. Can't leave the bathroom. Other than that, yeah, you just coffee, tough it up, drink some coffee, and push through your day, and then hope that you get to have a decent night's sleep that night. Like to Melissa's point about strong partners, if it was going to be a day where my husband was the domestic the next day and I was the worker, then I might be like elbow in the ribs. Okay, can you go please deal with this? Probably the most difficult was the sleep training, kind of nursing through the night transition. Sick kid in the middle of the night, that's like a one-off thing. Hopefully it's only going to be a day or two, and then you can kind of recover. But like every night, like I used to just dread nighttime because I knew I would go to bed, and then every 3 hours or every 1 hour, someone was going to be screaming and needing me, and needing to nurse, and not something that I can just elbow my husband and be like, go nurse the baby. Like, no, it's me. So
Technology's not there yet, but
technology's not quite there yet. Like a bottle, pump it. We did do some stuff where you pump milk. And he gives the baby a bottle so I can get some rest. I think we did that leading up to my exams, so I could at least have like some functioning brain cells writing my exams. But yeah, a lot of it is just like toughing it out and drinking a lot of coffee the next day, and then you crash when you get home for the most part.
Melissa, how about you? Because in Emerge or hospitalist, that's, it can be a no-go when you get that call.
No, my husband would take the hit 100% of the time. He would go. That's his job. Like, I think it's so much easier in a couple if you have one person who actually gets sick days, who has colleagues who can take over or something like that, and it would always be him. Also, he gets to clean up all the gross stuff. I don't like to do stuff like that. I'd rather hold the kid and he cleans up the stuff, Perhaps sounds mean, but I would like, and for Genevra's point about guilt, like I would just always play the doctor card. I play it at home. I'm very strict about it. I'd be like, mommy has a night shift. Like I would just be so mean about it. Like just be like, no way in hell, like you just wouldn't bother me. Like I would go and sleep like in a tent outside, like because I didn't want to hear their little voices. I don't want to hear any complaining. And then once I made my husband set up a tent for us in the barn area, like I just like, and I have rented Airbnbs and stuff like that because I just be like, nobody mess with my sleep. Yeah, if you can, like, if people aren't afraid to play the B card, just do it. Like you are not going to survive otherwise. Yeah, just be like, everybody has to be on board, and I am the top earner and I need to go out there.
So apropos of that, that is something, and again, acknowledging that not every couple, well, not every child has two parents, and not every mother will have a cooperative partner. But division of household duties is something that it certainly evolves. It's evolved in my own house. I guess, how did you each find things, especially as you, let's say, had another kid or the kids got a bit older? Again, things that you would, if you could tell other people that are sort of trying to puzzle solve their way out of it. How did those negotiations go? Ginevra, I don't know if you want to.
So, I feel like I remind myself, and I also give my husband a lot of credit where credit is due. And I tell him that I'm very lucky that I have a very atypical husband, I think, based on how I hear other people complain about their husbands. So he's typical in the sense that he doesn't really wake up very well in the middle of the night. Like I could pretty much throw him off the bed and he would not wake up. So I still get stuck with that kind of nighttime stuff. He'll wake up in the morning like, oh, I had such a great sleep. I'm like, really? I was up like 10 times. But everything else he does, I feel like during my residency, like as I became more senior in residency, when there's higher expectations of you, you have more responsibility, you become a chief resident, all of those things, and you have no control over your schedule. So it really was just, we from the very beginning had this very common goal that life is Ginevra needs to finish residency. And we really had this common goal. And I think that as I went further in my career or in my training, I guess, my husband just had to pick up more and more of the slack at home, and he never complained about it. And I mean, we had our moments where we would fight, or he would feel like I was taking advantage of how much work he would pick up or how much he was doing. I did what I could when I was at home. And I think after our nanny left was a lot of difficulty, because then all of the household chores and dinner prep and everything that she did as part of her job, we had to redelegate, and that became really difficult. In my Royal College year, and I don't know about non-medical specialties, but I know for sure in surgical specialties, in non-surgical specialties, I don't know what it's like, but in surgical specialties, it's almost like it's an entire year of intense training and studying and call. And
in internal medicine, at least speaking, having witnessed it with my wife, it's just as bad. And
and so from about September before the year before I wrote my exam for it, so like 8 months you're talking about, I like Melissa was saying, I had to really protect my time and my sanity and my sleep. And I moved into our spare bedroom in the basement. I had a desk there, I had a bed there. My daughter moved into my bed. She decided, hey, there's this spot beside daddy, I'm sleeping with daddy. And it was literally like I didn't ever really see my kids. They knew that I would eat dinner with them on the nights I was home. I would say goodnight to them and put them into bed. And on Sundays, I didn't study until after they went to bed. And so that was pretty much the schedule for 8 months of our lives. And somehow my kids survived. They ate, they grew, they had clean clothes, they made it to all their activities through no effort of mine. And so again, once I finished residency and started fellowship, where I had a lot more time back on my hands, we almost went through a reshuffling of responsibilities again. And I think that things are pretty fair and even. And I still do a lot. I do a lot more of the planning and figuring out where things are going to go. I do all of the budgeting. I pay all of the bills. I do all that kind of stuff. He still makes the kids' lunches. He still gets them up and ready for school. And we have a very strict, we try really hard to get our kids involved as much as possible. So, our 11-year-old helps us with dinner every night. Our 9-year-old does the dishes. Our 5-year-old sets and clears the table. Everybody helps with laundry, everybody. So we really try to encourage this. If you're part of the family, you contribute to the family in the way that you need to contribute. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's where I'm at.
No, and that's exactly kind of, how those decisions and negotiations are made. And I mean, it's a big part of having a long-term partner, but I think everyone has their ups and downs. Michelle, anything you want to add to that?
Well, so we're pretty much 50-50 in terms of the domestic stuff. Not, I'll do some things that my husband does all the car stuff, and I do all the, kids' medical and dental appointments. And so there's a division of labor, but I would say roughly we're roughly 50-50. And I think I would not have had a baby with someone who I was not in that kind of situation with. It just would not have worked for me. I knew I needed someone who was going to support me domestically, and that we were going to be able to split work if we needed to, and that I could prioritize my career at the points that I needed to, and someone who would support me. So, and we had the advantage of living together for many years before we had kids. So we got together pretty young. So we'd already kind of worked out those patterns a little bit, and there was still, of course, once there's a new baby and there's all these new demands and everything like that, it adds a whole bunch of stuff. So there's a renegotiation of things. But having to like one person, like having him off for an entire year with our first kid and doing all the domestic stuff, you know, that's great, because then he is aware of what needs to be done. And then when I'm doing the domestic stuff, like I'm aware of what needs to be done. So the fact that we're both doing it, I think gives us a better sense of what needs to be done. One of the things that often happens, and this is more kid related, less domestic, but one of us will come home from work and the other one's like, oh, I just had a day. And let me just tell you about this. And I went through this and went through that with the kids. And this one was yelling and that one was whining. And I'm just like, I know exactly what you're talking about. So we have we really understand, kind of empathize. We're able to really empathize with each other around those things, because it's exactly what we're both doing. It just depends on the day. But for sure, my advice to anyone considering having a baby is get that stuff sorted out. The domestic split, at least have in your, if it's not going to be 50-50, at least have in your own mind what the domestic split is going to be, and make sure you're okay with it, because it's not a surprise you want to go through with a newborn, you know, to figure out that suddenly the expectation is not what you thought it was going to be. But and I'm getting just like Ginevra, my kids are roughly the same age as yours. So we've been, during the pandemic, our house is like a disaster. So a few months ago, my husband and I were like, the kids aren't doing enough around here. You're going to do laundry every day. You're going to do this. You kids, the 9 and 12-year-old are going to be making dinner once a week. So we've gotten like really, okay, the kids need to contribute more, and it's great. We should have done it earlier for sure. So, and like once you go in that direction, like you don't go back. So they're going to.
I'm always surprised at how many people think that I expect too much of my kids, and I'm like, really? Because if I could get them to do more, I would totally have them doing more.
Absolutely. And like, yeah, they're fully capable of those sorts of like simple tasks, emptying the dishwasher, making a simple dinner, vacuuming, laundry. You just have to get past the like whining kind of hump of them complaining about it. And then it's like, no, you're fully capable of that. And then once they're used to it, like, oh, it's just a chore that they do. But yeah, the whining first is a big stage.
Melissa may want to add something, because I know she has at least one teenager. And I can speak for what it's like with teenagers and trying to get them to do chores, and things, the dynamic changes are a bit, but you go ahead, Melissa.
We don't have that many tips, but I do have 3 tips in general. So one of them is that, yes, maximize what your partner does. Like absolutely top. Like I have to say my guy does more than I do. And that's just what he does. He's a better cleaner. He was better at doing the cloth diapers. The irony is that he hates it, but he's so good at it, you know? So like, and he's the one who cleans the kitchen every night and all that stuff. And the second tip is, if you can, hire help. It will save your sanity. It will save your marriage. Like it is so good. Like we just had our cleaner come today. Amazing. Like worth every penny if you can afford it. But the third thing for us has been low expectations. So when I had my son, one of my friends said to me, the key to motherhood is low expectations. So I was like, oh, wow, this is completely the opposite of medicine and writing and anything else. So I called her up a few days later and I was like, both of us are clean and fed, and I took a shower. It's only 8 o'clock. And she was like, wow, that's incredible. So just especially through babyhood and stuff, just low expectations. So just enjoy like every little milestone. You're just like, wow, I am incredible. That was amazing, instead of punishing yourself. I actually don't make my kids do that much. It is always me. I'm always the mean one. They do basic things like empty the dishwasher, and they can hang up the laundry and stuff like that. I have to say, actually, with COVID, unfortunately, the mood hasn't been so good for my older one. So I have backed off a bit, just because it just feels like there's not a lot of pleasure in life. And then to be adding the chores on top of it, like they really feel like that's too much. So I'm just like, you know what? School's almost over. It's not that big a deal. You know, we still have our Christmas tree up. Frank had made fun of me before about that before. But, you know, as my family points out, if you leave it up long enough, it's easier to leave. Like,
yeah, it's early for next year. That's, what do you mean?
So I'm getting used to it. So I'm just like, oh, well, you know, there are other things that need like my time and attention, but the Christmas tree is not one of them.
I was going to say, nobody can come to your house and, you know, because of COVID and judge you on it anyways. So as long as you don't hold the Zoom calls in front of it, no one's the wiser.
And it could just be a fake background anyway. You know,
one sort of, one or two last things that I wanted to get to before we have some questions from viewers. One is actually specific for you, Ginevra. I hope you don't mind putting you on the spot. but what it's like to be a physician and the parent of a special needs kid. Because I don't think any of the rest of us really know that, and any insights you have and sort of your adjustments there.
Yeah, I think so. My oldest son, he's 11. He's on the autism spectrum. He's on the high functioning end for sure. He also has ADHD, and as he grows up, he gets more, and there's new issues that come to light. He was diagnosed when I was in my, we always knew that there was something a little bit off about him. And so the official diagnosis was underway during my first year of residency. And I found it extremely difficult to manage being in training. And I can only really speak as a trainee, because at that time there was a lot of like having to ask permission to miss things or take time off or try to juggle and book appointments really early in the morning or really late at night. And most of these really special needs places, like developmental pediatricians, whatever, it's like you just get on the waiting list and you go to the appointment when you get called for it. And so I found that was really difficult. It added a lot of stress. And because in certain situations like that, there's so many appointments, people start to wonder, what are you doing? Like, why aren't you, like, you need to either take time off and deal with that, or you need to prioritize work over your children. And it was really difficult to navigate, because oftentimes it's hard to take time off of residency without making a huge ordeal about it. And I ended up doing that. So when we finally got the diagnosis, I actually did take a month off completely, because there were so many, we need to get set up with this resource, we need to get set up with that resource. And it was like these floodgates of appointments and phone calls, and just my own needing to deal with the emotional and mental, I don't want to say fallout, but just what it means to have your child diagnosed with that was a lot. And I felt like there's just no room for that in medicine. And going forward, like, I had this really, really bad experience actually near the end of my residency, where my son started having really bad anxiety, and we tried to get him set up with a new psychiatrist, and we had to go through public health and see this social worker through there. That was the only gateway. And this social worker was just so judgmental. Like, I couldn't believe it. She was like, the latest appointment she had was 3. Well, I hardly could make these appointments. And then she insisted that I had to stay there and be there the whole time. And then at the end, every appointment, she'd be like, I think that your son doesn't realize that he has you as an ally in his life, because you're always working and you haven't accessed the resources that have been available to you. And at one point I just turned around to her and I said, if I was a single mother doing this by myself without a partner and working 11 hours a day, 80 to 100 hours a week, working 2 jobs to support my family, would you ever sit down and look at me and say, I'm not doing enough, and that actually I'm being more of a detriment to my child than a help? Like, I almost felt like, because I'm a physician and I'm supposed to be of high means and high, health literacy, that it almost made it more difficult to do what I needed to do for my son, because people have these preconceived notions that, oh, well, you're a doctor, just take time off work, you can afford it, you can do this, like, or why aren't you doing everything possible for your child, because you know how much better it can be if you do. And I think that there's just a lack of understanding in the areas that you seek support, and there's also a lack of understanding, ironically, at least in my experience, as a trainee in medicine.
Oh, thank you. Okay, a couple questions in our last few minutes from the audience. The first one, and I do not know the answer, does the system acknowledge paternity leaves for male physicians, whether in training or in practice? And what are the specifics? I imagine that would differ from province to province. Michelle, do you know offhand?
So yeah, I think it does differ from province to province. Well, so in residency, which is sometimes we get the advice that residency is the best time to have a kid, because that's the only time, likely to be the only time in your career that you're going to be salaried and you're going to have access to EI. So that's going to be, you're not going to have access as the non-birthing parent. You don't have access to the pregnancy component, but you still have access to the parental component. So that's like federal. And then the rest is going to vary province to province. Like the OMA has a benefit up to 17 weeks. I think that includes the pregnancy part. So I think it's 9 weeks for the parental part. And that's just additional funding and support. And then that's going to vary from province to province. I don't really know outside of Ontario, but in terms of like the culture of is it supportive in residency for a man to take parental leave? I'm not the best person to speak to that. I feel like no. I feel like the answer is no.
I can answer
yeah,
that.
can you yeah,
Sure,
speak to
yeah.
that, please?
So I did residency in Alberta, so my experiences with PARA, the resident association in Alberta, and I think that the parental portion is the same whether you can take it as the male or the female partner, but the thing is that no, men don't take it, because at least in surgical specialties, it's so uncommon. And I believe it was Michelle, you were saying, when your husband would take paternity leave, everybody was like, what are you doing? Like, this is career suicide. And I feel like it's so unacceptable. I mean, it's unacceptable enough for women to do this, that it's even more unacceptable for a man to say, like, I think I knew one resident, a male resident, like a urology resident or something, who took 2 weeks off when his wife had a baby. And even that, he said, was like fighting tooth and nail to be able to just take 2 weeks off to be at home to help his wife. So the funding is there, I think, like in terms of legislature and what's appropriate for like human rights from the, top down is allowed. But in terms of the culture, I think it's really, and I personally believe that if you're going to get a change in what's acceptable or advocating for parental rights and parental leaves and all of these things, that there really needs to be a huge shift when it comes to the male partner, because I think there's a lot of men who would love to be able to do that and have that, but it's even more unheard of in their realm than it is in our realm.
Cool. Okay, next question. When did you start your kids on chores and how? In our house, it was generally done as a, you will do this, generally because of some transgression that we've noticed. And certainly with teenagers, it can be pulling teeth to get them to, hey, when's the last time the cat box was done? When was the garbage taken out? And but for those of you with younger kids that are perhaps somewhat impressionable.
I actually I recently, not a couple years ago, took a online parenting course because I was tired of yelling at my kids and I felt bad about it all the time. And there was actually, it was the person who runs this course, she's based on the positive parenting framework. And she had this table. She said, first of all, stop calling them chores, call them family contributions. If you're part of the family, you contribute to the family. And she had this list of age appropriate chores. And when I saw this list, I was like, oh my gosh, like I could be getting my kids to do so much more. And when I sat down and said, okay, well, for this age group, you should be able to do all of these things on this list, plus everything for all the ages lower than you, it really opened my eyes to what I could be expecting of my children. And so my husband and I sat down and we said, okay, we have 3 kids. These are their ages. Let's shuffle the responsibilities around. And then we tried to make sure that it balanced out. So, around dinner time, the oldest helps prepare dinner. The youngest sets and clears the table. And then the middle one will load the dishwasher. And that way it's like, okay, everybody's contributing around mealtime. So we all have a family contribution in that way. And that's how it fits. And so I found that finding that table, the person I took the course from was Amy McCready. I have no financial reason to recommend her, except that that's how I got my kids into doing more responsibilities around the house.
Although I'm not good at doing chores, like having our kids do chores around the house, one thing that they did used to do was when they were little, they loved cooking, for example. So as young as 2, they would start and helping with that. So if you have real little ones, you can just try and build on that. The problem is, I guess, is that I let them not keep up with that. But if you can keep up, then please keep doing it.
Yeah, I think you have to start young enough where they think it's still kind of cool to hang out with you and do grown-up stuff. So yeah, a lot of like, come into the kitchen, let's do some fun stuff. And of course that makes more of a mess in the long run, but then, or in the short term, but then yeah, more of a mess than anything else. But it's like, you get a little bit of involvement and then it's like, you're building on those skills. Look at what you can do, or you're capable of this, you're capable of that. And you just kind of like build up on that. And then eventually you get to the point where they're like, I don't want to. It's like, well, you can do it. And what I often say to them is similar to the kind of contributions, but maybe a little bit more of a harder negative approach to it. Is like, I don't want to do it. Well, I don't want to do it either, but the dishwasher needs to be emptied. Like someone's got to do it. So are you telling me I have to do it after I worked all day, or are you going to do it after you just like were outside playing and you know, on the front lawn? Like, you know, so it's a lot of like, but I think they kind of understand the perspective of like, we're a team and we all contribute and we're all, you know, this is part of it. We're all in it together.
Yeah, I think the one thing with the kitchen is always tough because, and this is something that I only noticed as once I left practice and I sort of really took over, is that the cleaning as you're going and keeping a clean kitchen that's sort of like it's the final skill that you master. And so, you know, my children, for example, are wonderful at, you know, now they just completely cook for themselves. But getting to pick up after themselves that's like, oh, they're not there yet. And anyway, the last question that we got here, and boy, this is a loaded one. It was, would you encourage your kids to go into medicine? Like, well, it's a little bit out of left field for the topic, but based strictly on parenting issues?
My daughter's already decided she's going to be a doctor and an astronaut, like Roberta Bondar style. So like we're just going with it. We're going with, that's been her, she's been super into space since forever. I don't know where the doctor thing came from, but I think just the Roberta Bondar, she looks up to her. So she's just like, this, I'm going to be, that's been her refrain, mommy, doctor, astronaut. So the mommy is in there as well for some reason. So I'm like, okay, cool. The other two, you know, if they were interested in it, sure, I wouldn't hold them back. I wouldn't push them. You know, I came from like the traditional kind of like immigrant Jewish family where it's like you're going to medicine because that's how we know we've achieved success in this new country. But which I think a lot of people can relate to. Medicine is the top
of the menu.
You're
given a menu
sure.
of 5 careers. But
5 careers, and you're going to go for the one that we're going to have the most bragging rights on. So you're going to do
exactly.
it. You're good in biology. All right, you're going to medicine. So you know, I'm not going to do that. But I wouldn't discourage them if they were interested. So yeah.
That's a nice answer. I like to say that when my daughter was about 3, she was interested in doing it, and she would say she wanted to be a doctor, and I could see that she was looking at me for encouragement. And I always was very neutral because it costs so much money, and you have to really, really love it, and it's hard to say when you're 3. She since has lost interest in it, and my son was never interested in it. So I think I'm not going to be strongly encouraging my kids to do it, but if they did, then I would support them, knowing that I have to work longer and harder in order to get them through the course.
I think that I went into medical school very naive about what it meant to be a physician. I came from, you know, I'm like a first generation immigrant family, and I'm the first person in my family to have gone to university, and arguably I have the highest level of achieved post-secondary education of everybody in my family. So in that sense, you know, there was a lot of pressure on me to go to university, and kind of like Michelle was saying, like, oh, well, you need to do something really good with your life. And I really thought that being a doctor, you know, you go, I want to be a doctor because I want to take care of people, because I like medicine, I like science and all of these things. And if I were to go back to who I was when I started this adventure, I would have a lot more to say and a lot more. And I don't know if I would have done it. And it's hard to say because I'm just at the end of my training. I haven't gotten to what I hope are the payoff years yet. But I'm saying that because if my children expressed interest in going into medicine, which none of them really have yet, they're all still kind of young, I would want to make sure that they had a really balanced understanding of what it means to be a physician, and that it's not what you see on TV, and it's not what, you know, you hear about in the media necessarily. There's a lot that you have to think about financially, invest personal time and mental energy investment, and what you're sacrificing on the side. Like I feel like I did sacrifice a lot in my life and for my children and for myself, and I'm hoping that it will be worth it.
And most importantly, the patient does not jump 3 feet off the bed and then wake up when you put the paddles on them. That's not the way the resuscitation works. Well, I can see by the clock on the lower right-hand corner of my screen that we are getting close to go cook dinner, Mom, Dad. I'm going to get both the dogs and my kids asking me what's to eat. So I want to thank Doctors Melissa Ioannidis, Michelle Cohen, and Ginevra Mills for an amazing talk from three awesome writers, bloggers, and moms. And I think we will make sure that when this is posted online, there are going to be links to the various resources, including the specific program that came up from the Ontario Medical Association. We had a little signal flag that there is a web link that we'll make sure goes up there. And otherwise, everybody, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for
And
having
Great,
us.
thanks.
Thank you very much.
Okay, everyone, enjoy your weekend.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.